All right, guys, welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, Common Privileged Password Mistakes and Identifying Their Hidden Security Risks, with our favorite SANS faculty fellow and industry-recognized security expert, Dr. Eric Cole. You're also joined by Beyond Trust product manager, Martin Kennard, who will run us through a Beyond Trust overview and a demo of PowerBroker Password Safe towards the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today, and I'd like to remind you to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end. So anytime you have a question, just pop it on in, and I will be monitoring those throughout. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. So now that that is all out of the way, I'd like to welcome Eric to the line. Hello, Eric. Please jump right in. I know you have a lot of content to cover. It's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope everyone's in a good peak state this morning, because I'll tell you, passwords are not always the most exciting topic when it comes to security. And I know sometimes people keep a nice password manual next to their bed just in case they're having trouble sleeping, right? They'll go in and read that a little bit, whoo, they'll go right to sleep. But the reason why we're focusing an entire webinar on this is what I find in security is very often the most critical areas of weakness are often ignored by a company. I see these organizations spending millions of dollars on all these different crazy state-of-the-art technologies, and they get compromised because they had privileged access, they had weak password, they didn't control their data, they didn't control their information. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off laying the framework of why passwords are so important. And then I'm going to take you through some real scenarios, some real high-level attacks we've seen, and identify where those security risks are. And then what I love about doing these webinars is I lay out the problem and the high-level solution, and then the magnificent Martin from Beyond Trust is going to actually give you a real-world solution. He's going to show you how to fix it. So I know with a lot of these webinars, we just sort of go in and say, okay, here's the challenge, go fix it. But here we're giving you the actual solution. We're showing you how to address it firsthand. Now, I always like starting off my webinars with a few questions just to get you thinking. And here's the question. What is the difference between a major breach and a minor breach? Well, I guess I shouldn't give you the answer, right? That's sort of giving it away if you read the screen. But hopefully you didn't look at the screen. So just ask yourself, just think for 5 or 10 seconds. What is the difference between a breach that you would consider major and a breach you consider minor? Maybe another way to think about it is if you get a call this evening saying you have a breach, there's 2 things that could happen. One is you'll have to go into work and stay there for the next 3 days because it's a major, major problem. Or you might go to sleep and say, I'll address it the next day. It's a minor issue. What is that difference? I'll tell you. It's pretty revealing, but pretty simple. It's the data that was accessed by the adversary. It's what information was ultimately compromised. Whether a server gets broken into or whether an organization gets compromised, that's not the differentiator. It's what did the adversary do? What was the damage component that was in place? Now let's really break that down. If we break that down to the fundamental components, the way somebody accesses your data is they have to be able to log, connect, or access the system. And there are different ways through vulnerable ports and services. But I'll tell you, in most cases, they do have to get privileged passwords. They do have to get privileged access, unless you're just totally gross negligent and just have your data sitting totally unprotected on a server accessible from the internet, right? That's a whole another problem. But in most cases, that data had some protection, But the real big issues is they didn't identify all of the accounts. They didn't know how strong those passwords were, and they didn't properly control access. So here's another question, and be honest. How much confidence do you have right now in your passwords? And I don't mean 98% of them. I mean that 2%. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And I always sort of find it humorous because many people are still in what I call college mode. In college, getting a 94 or a 95 on an exam is actually pretty good. Especially if it's a hard class, you're really happy with a 94 or 95. The problem in security is we don't go in and look at the fact that you got a 94 or 95. We look at the fact that you got 6% weakness. You got 6% wrong. Because unfortunately, that's what the adversary focuses on. So maybe another way to ask that question is being completely honest. How much confidence do you have right now that an adversary couldn't connect to a system from the internet, couldn't compromise a password, gain privileged access, and access your critical data? What is really your confidence level? Well, let's look at a different scenario. How confident are you that an adversary cannot compromise an internal system, use that to elevate their privileges by compromising passwords, and from there doing lateral movement, or what we call pivoting, into your network and causing additional harm and additional damage? And I know sometimes when I present on this topic, people go, yeah, Eric, this stuff is pretty basic. This stuff is pretty foundational. This is pretty fundamental stuff. And I go, are you doing it or not? And they go, well, we're not doing it. I'm like, then we're going to talk about it, right? So we got to get around that going, Eric, people have been talking about passwords. People have been talking about access control for many, many years. Yes, and my response is, and I'm keep going to talk about it until people start to address it. So I get so frustrated in security when people ignore the foundational but most critical items. Just think for a second. If you went in and did a better job with controlling privileged access, locking down your passwords, securing your critical information, doesn't that make a huge improvement in your overall security? Isn't that really, really the big difference makers? So very often, you don't need to spend millions of dollars on doing good things. You need to focus in on the right things that matter. And what's so interesting to me is very often those right things are pretty easy and simple. They're just being ignored. And as I said, Martin will show you some pretty amazing solutions from Beyond Trust that will help give you that visibility, help you fix, help you address those critical issues. So some of my favorite questions, and just in case you've never heard me present before, I'm a big fan of a thinking audience. I just don't want you sitting there saying everything I say, taking it on face value, and sort of being a robot. I want to challenge you. I want to get you thinking. I want your juices to be flowing, so when you get off this call, you are actually excited to make a difference, look and examine. So one of the ways is I love asking you questions, because what I find, security people are very smart, and every organization is unique and different. So what I found is if I go in and say, your data is not protected, your data is exposed, your data can easily be accessed, the initial reaction of most people is, no, it's not, no, it's not, and you shut down. But instead, what if I ask you, what is your most critical information? Where is it located? All the locations. Who has access to it? And who is really accessing it? Very different way of looking at it. Because it doesn't matter what I see with my customers. It only matters what you see at your organization. So really ask yourself, Do you have a prioritized list of your critical data? Do you know all the places where it's located? Now, I'll tell you, this is the one that many companies get into trouble, because here's what happens. I'll be working with a customer. They will tell me what their critical information is, and they will say, Eric, it's located on these 5 servers. And you know something? They're absolutely correct. It is located on those 5 servers. Here's the problem. It's also located on 4 other servers that they're not aware of. Now, let me ask you a question. If you believe that data is on 5 servers, you're going to protect, secure, and lock down those 5 servers. But if your data is also on 4 other servers that you don't know about, well, by the fact that you don't know about them means you're not going to fix it or address it. So if there's 9 servers that have your data, 5 that are really secure, and 4 that you're not aware of, so are probably exposed and vulnerable, which one would you go after if you were the adversary? Which one would you be breaking into? I don't know about you. I would go after the 4. And that's the thing we see all the time. One of the number 1 comments we get back from companies after breaches is, we had no idea. I had no idea that that administrative account had a weak password. I had no idea that that data was on that server. Or a twist of the no idea is, that account was deleted 3 months ago. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. And they're like, yes, it was. And I'm like, you want to look and see? And they go, wait a second, that should have been deleted 3 months ago. So very often, the reality of your environment and what you think are not the same. And you need to identify and find those gaps before the adversary does. Otherwise, you're in a really bad state. One other thing I always like bringing up when talking about passwords is, what we'll cover in the next slide, but I want to remind you, security is all about defense in depth. So when we do these deep dive topics, I definitely don't want you walking away saying, Dr. Cole is crazy. Well, if you ask most people that know me, that's a true statement, but that's a different argument. But you'll go ahead and say, he is only telling us we have to focus on passwords. But you still have to patch, you still have, yes. I am deep diving in one area that I feel is a huge problem organizations are ignoring, and there's easy, straightforward solutions. But I am in no way, shape, or form saying that's the only thing. So just putting in the bigger picture, the most important part of any structure, whether we're talking cyber or the real world, anytime you're looking at any structure, the most important component is the foundation. You can have the most beautiful house on the planet, but if it does not have a good, strong foundation, what's going to happen? The house is not going to last very long. The house is going to collapse and fall apart. You need to have that foundation in place. Well, what is the most important part of security? The foundation. And this is the issue. Most companies are so concerned about the beautiful house. They're spending millions of dollars on all these different technologies and appliances, which I'm not saying is wrong, but they forget about the foundation. And that's why when the attackers come knocking, they can get in, even though you've spent $20, $30 million on security, or if you're a smaller organization, $1 million, but there's no foundation. The foundation is lacking. And tying in with passwords, access control, privileged access, I would argue that the foundation of security is asset inventory, configuration management, and change control. Now I'll prove it to you. I'll prove to you how important these are. Let's imagine I'm giving you a $50 million security budget. You know something? It's a Monday. Some of you, it's early Monday. So I'm going to be super generous because I'm just such a nice guy, and that's how I roll. I'm going to give you $100 million security budget. You can spend $100 million on anything you want. But question, if you don't address these foundational items, how effective will that $100 million be? Zero. Let me prove it to you. You just spent $100 million on security, but you don't have asset inventory. You don't know what your critical assets are. You don't know how they're configured, and you don't control and manage change. So you ready for this? This is like super cool in a bad, scary way. You just spent all this money on security. But if I can go in and put a new system on your network, asset inventory, I can put critical data on it with privileged accounts with weak passwords and vulnerabilities. So no configuration management. And I change your environment so that system is visible from the internet. How effective is your $100 million? Nothing. I'm still going to break in because you didn't control the assets, you didn't control the access, the privileged passwords, and you didn't control the configuration and change incurred in your environment. So once again, I'm a big fan on report cards. It's report card time. It is the end of the quarter. Give yourself a grade. How well would you do on asset inventory, A through F? How well would you do on configuration management? And how well would you do on change control? Now, I'll give you a little secret. You get below a B in any one of those areas, and I'm looking at my crystal ball. Eric, the fortune teller, is looking in the crystal ball, and here's my prediction. There is a breach in your future. There is a really bad breach in your future. So you have two options. You can either change your future by focusing in on these areas, privileged access passwords, or you can ignore and let the future happen, and then you have a major, major incident. Trust me on this one. If there's any piece of advice I can give you when it comes to security, that advice is you're going to pay. If you pay now, it's always cheaper than paying later. I cannot tell you how many times I am sitting with organizations, whether it's a security engineer, a manager, a director, a C-level executive, and there's a proposal for $300K, and they go in and say, Eric, we can't afford the $300K. Here's the problem with that discussion. Only one data point is being presented. So the analysis that's performed, that's wrong, but the analysis that's performed is they're saying, okay, we spend $300K or we spend zero, and if we spend zero, we're still okay. That's the wrong analysis. If you want to be successful in selling security, you want to be a successful security executive, the trick is always present all the options. So I always go into the execs and say, okay, you can spend $300K and reduce the probability of having an attack by 80%, or in 6 to 9 months, you can spend $5 million on incident response, breach fines, and lost customers. Which option would you like? Now remember, security is the probability for loss. We don't know for sure. So is that number 80, 90, or 70? But I will tell you, if you are ignoring these areas, if you are not controlling the foundation, if you are not controlling access, the probability of the breach is very, very high. So you need to go in and always present multiple options. Do you want to spend $300K today, or do you want to spend $5 million in 6 to 9 months? One of those two things are going to happen. You need to decide. And now you're presenting the problem completely differently. You're now showing them both sides. The reason why many, and it's getting better today, but the reason why many security budgets are not approved is because you're only giving them one data point. Give them additional data points. And as I mentioned, no security out there is going to go in and protect you. So I know some of you might be going, but yes, Eric, even if we go in and we lock down our passwords, even if we lock down our accounts, even if we do all these things you're saying about privilege, password, and access control, we could still have a breach. Yes, but you're reducing the probability significantly. And that's the part people miss. I love learning. I try to read one book a week. When I'm teaching, I don't always meet that, but I try. And I'm always looking at different areas of security. I love nonfiction. Just always learning, always getting new knowledge. And I'm reading this book a few weeks ago on an airplane. And the person is showing the current state of security, the threats, and then they make this statement. You will not be able to prevent all attacks. Therefore, you shouldn't even try. You should take all the prevention out of your network and only focus on detection. And I'm sitting there, and I didn't realize that I sometimes speak out loud and yell at myself or yell at books, and I'm on an airplane. And out loud, I sit there and go, that is the most galactically stupidest thing I ever heard. I mean, that is just stupid. Now, don't get me wrong. I completely agree that you cannot prevent all attacks. I'm with you there. But then to make the claim that you shouldn't even try, that's insane. Now, you might only be able to prevent 50, 60, or 70, but that's still pretty darn good. So you still need to prevent. And guess what? The more you prevent, the easier it is to detect, because there's the less information you have to see of what's happening. So yes, even with strong passwords, controlling privileged access, a breach could still occur, but you're greatly reducing the chances. And now, as you'll see later on with the Beyond Trust demo, now you can get the visibility and optics into rogue accounts, rogue access, and now detection becomes easier because there's less things to look at and there's less areas we have to focus in on. And then really the cornerstone of security that we very often forget but very important is what we call AAA. Now, yes, there's an I in there. We sometimes joke the I is silent. But what it really comes down to is identification, authentication, authorization, and accountability. Somebody is going to identify themselves to a system, and then you have to prove they are who they say they are. So that's the authentication. And yes, today there's many ways, but even with all the different ways, something you have like a token or an access card, something you are like biometrics, some place you are GPS, the most popular and common method today, just from implementation and other factors, is something you know were passwords. Now, don't get me wrong, two-factor and those other things are good, but passwords are going to be around for a while. You need to address it and you need to fix it. You need to make sure you're controlling and managing that access. Then once you prove that someone is who they say they are, then authorization. What are they allowed to do? What access do they have on the system? And then finally, accountability is getting that visibility in what they're actually doing. And I'll tell you, if we look at this list, most companies, authentication, probably somewhere in a C+, B-. Authorization, you're usually D+, C-. And accountability, you're usually F. I mean, that's just the way it goes. Most companies try to control who gets in, but they really fall short on the authorization and accountability piece. And what we really want to look at is the least privilege, need to know, separation, rotation. Now, I'll just sort of give you a warning. Some of the things I sometimes present are paradigm shifts. They're different than how we look at the problem today. But I would argue that the way we look at the problem today is very often 1980s thinking. Maybe, if we're being nice, 1990. If I'm being super generous, 2000. But a lot of our thinking today is really 15, 20 years old. So it needs to change. So I'm going to say some things where you're like, that's not how we do it today. Yeah, but is it working? And the other thing I will tell you is everything I'm presenting, we do for our customers. I sort of joke, I never present just ideas. I present proven solutions. So anything I'm telling you, I have experimented in my laboratory, which is the world, with real customers, and this stuff works. So let's take a look. Least privilege. Give someone the least amount of access they need to do their job. Now, here's the first paradigm shift. Most people today, you go in and say, okay, I'm not sure if somebody needs access to this. If you're not sure if somebody needs access, what's the default option in most companies? Give it to them. It's better they have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Sounds good. It's crap, but it does sound good. It doesn't work. Here's why. If you give somebody more access than what they need, and it's compromised by the adversary doesn't call you up and say, you gave me extra access. Can you please remove it? Right? It doesn't work that way. So what you're actually doing is not doing least privilege. If least privilege says give somebody the least amount of access they need, and you're not sure, so you're giving them more access, you're, by definition, defeating least privilege. Better way. If you're not sure if somebody needs the access, don't give it to them. Oh, but Eric, what if they need it? They'll call you. Isn't it better for them to request and verify that they need the access than giving it to them and creating an exposure point? And I know you're going, oh, but Eric, this is going to create so much work. No, it doesn't. And here's the real question. It creates a lot less work than dealing with a major incident. Dealing with a major incident is a lot of work. Having a user periodically call up and say, I need this access that I don't have, is not a lot of work. So I think we need to sort of stop making those excuses and look at reality. Another paradigm shift. Only give them the access when it's absolutely needed. Do you work 24/7, 365? Do you work nonstop? Of course not. You take breaks, you go home, you sleep, you spend time with family, you do things on weekends. Therefore, why is your access 24/7? Why are you giving people access every minute of every hour of every day of every year when they're only using it maybe 40% of the time? So when they're not at work, why not go in and disable that access? And a lot of people are like, that's very interesting. Because here's the real part, the real cool part. Most attackers break into a system after hours. So if I go home at 7 and my access disables at 8, now if the adversary tries to get in at 2 o'clock, they can't in the morning. It's not going to work. So just simple things like that. Now, I know most people go, oh, but Eric, people work dynamic hours. Let me let you know a couple of facts. First of all, it's not near as dynamic as you think. We've studied and analyzed this, and I always get people going, oh, if you only give me access from 8 to 7, I come in at all different hours, and we watch them for a year, and they don't. But I'm still going to give that to you. But here's a couple of ways. One, give them access from 8 a.m. till 7 p.m., and then they can have a mobile app that if they have to come in at 5, 10 seconds. They just open up the mobile app saying, I'm showing up at 5, and they boom, and the access is granted. Out of band, easy. Or here's the one that's even simpler. Tie it to your physical badging system. We do this with all our customers. It's brilliant. When they badge in the morning and they go in the building, what happens? Their domain or network account is enabled and their VPN account is disabled because they're in the building, so they can only access locally. When they badge out, their local account is disabled and their VPN account is enabled. Now, we don't even have to worry about the user doing anything. It's automatically happening and occurring. Then, of course, if the access they need is too much, we want to break it up over 2 or more parties, separation of duties, and then because separation of duties erodes over time, we want to constantly do the rotation of duties so there's always checks and balances in place. Then, we want to make sure whenever we create accounts that we're maintaining and monitoring. And this is another one, paradigm shift, but it always makes me shake my head. I go into companies and I ask them, how many employees and contractors do you have? And they'll say 30,000. I then say, how many physical badges do you have? They'll say 31,000. I then say, how many active accounts do you have? And they go 250,000. Huh? Companies, for some reason, are not disabling accounts. They're not going in and removing the access. And this is something we've solved. Does your driver's license last forever? No, it expires. Does your credit card last forever? No, it expires. Does your password last forever? No, it expires. Does your account last forever? Yes. Very interesting. Why aren't we using expiration like we're doing in every other area of our life? Why don't we go in and put an expiration date on those accounts? Oh, but Eric, what if we need the access longer? What if you need your credit card after it expires? You renew it. What if you need your driver's license after it expires? You renew it. So a lot of times in security, we're our own worst enemy because we make these arbitrary excuses that just don't hold a lot of weight. So there's a lot of things we can start doing to help protect and lock down. We're just not doing it. So let's finish up by just proving this, by just showing you some of the different attack scenarios we've seen and what the issue is and what the remediation is. So we see this one a lot. Adversary is going to find some web portal because, let's face it, everything is web enabled. So let me ask you a question. If I go in and give you a computer, a web browser, and internet access, what can you access at your company? Just about anything. All right, just think about it. Almost everything is web enabled. So let me ask you a question. Doesn't an adversary have a computer, have a browser, and have an internet connection? Absolutely, which means they can also access everything. So we see all these times where these web portals, and it only takes one weak account. The adversary will do account harvesting. They find a weak password, break it, get into the system. Basically, the failure is there's not good password controls, there's no monitoring. Remediation is just strong password policy and account lockout. Some of the simple stuff I know we've been talking about for a while, organizations just are not doing it. Then another one, users don't properly protect their credential. They go in, and how many times, if you're at an airport, or I love it at security conferences, and you walk around and nobody locks their computer, nobody locks their terminal. I don't say anything because I really am on your side, but it always amazes me. I teach a security class. We take a break, and half the classroom has work production systems unlocked and just open. anyone in that room or from the outside could potentially access it. So we see this all the time. So once again, screen lockout, monitoring, multi-factor awareness. And you're going to start to notice some similar themes. We also, still amazes me that people will have computers with encrypted hard drives, locked down, protected, and secure, but they're allowed to copy all their data to USB drives. And a USB, I think a portable hard drive, that's not a good explanation. That is basically a server backup. You can buy 64 gig USB drives. I think they're like $5 or $10, maybe 15, depending on where you are. That's a server backup. Think of how much information you can have on that USB, and it's totally unprotected and in an exposed state. Also tied to the USB, companies are not controlling their data. Data classification is a whole other discussion. That might actually be a good topic for a future webcast with Beyond Trust, controlling and managing access to your data. But that's a whole other one where companies don't know where the data is. They don't know the segmentation of their network. They don't know where the flow is. I use the word advanced phishing very generous because in many cases it's basic phishing where people receive an email that looks like it came from a legitimate person, and they click on a link or open an attachment, and it affects the system. And once again, same type of problems here. They don't have proper controlling of access. They don't have visibility. They're not managing the executable on the system. And then finally, we get our malicious external. And I am going through these quick because I really just want to prove to you the problem. I want to prove to you that attack after attack after attack, it's all about the privileged access, the passwords. So I'm sort of setting up this problem set with the solution so Martin can go in and be able to address how to fix this with Beyond Trust. So once again, adversaries target either a computer on the DMZ or an internal user. They get access and they pivot, and because there's no controlled access, no passwords, they can break accounts, they can elevate privileges, and they can just move very easily into that network. So in summary, as I finish up my section, just think about this. If an adversary cannot get access to a system, if they cannot log into a system, then they really can't cause damage. So if we can control those access, if we can control those passwords, we're taking away one of the key vectors. And then let's say they do get in, but they can't access critical data. We're now controlling the damage. So ultimately, we need to have visibility into our accounts, our passwords, and make sure we're properly protecting, securing, and locking down our system. Now, I set up the problem, but now we're getting ready to talk about the solution. So I want you all to go to your window and look at the sky. And I know you're going to see an object. And you might be saying, is it a bird? Is it a plane? And I'm telling you, it's the amazing Martin coming in as Superman to show you the solution with Beyond Trust. So Martin, take it away.
Da-da-da! Here he is. Thank you so much, Eric. That was a really great presentation. And actually, it's to say, this really, you've nailed it, in terms of all of the basic issues, and so it's down to that sort of, the authorization, the authentication, accountability. The whole AAA stuff that's been around almost as long as I have. It's really the basics need to be covered, to be able to, to really give you that reassurance of security. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'm sure somebody will shout out if they can't. What I want to do is just actually take you through a few slides, set up the solution, overlay on top of what Eric's already explained, about how our solution works and what we can do for you. But really the meat and potatoes is when we actually get into the demo, because then I can show you how easy it is to implement, and not only just implement, but how easy it is for your users to be able to use. All right, we'll find my mouse. So, I mean, as you'd expect from the title, bit of a giveaway, password management is what it does. It's all about giving access to carbon-based life forms to say, give me the credentials for this account, to be able to release it for a given amount of time, and to be able to ensure that when the user isn't using the password, that it's securely squirreled away, that it's been changed, and it's, vaulted in a position where, nobody has access to it. Now, it's not just people that need access to passwords, but, I'm sure that many companies, if not every company, has a plethora of Windows services that are started by service accounts. So we can manage those as well. Scheduled tasks, another example of that. So as we change those back-end managed accounts that will, generally have privileges in the organization, we have the ability to be able to then change the services, the scheduled tasks, and recycle them as well. A2A, huge area. Most companies have scripts, and whether it's a very basic level from the web services perspective, or whether they actually have their own in-house development teams. But generally, applications need privileges to be able to run, and so we have the ability to be able to manage those. SSH key management. This is something that, but when you look at the sort of weakest link, you can either cover all of your passwords, but if you don't cover your SSH keys and you're using them, then, it's an attack surface, that can be leveraged by an attacker. So certainly, SSH key management, is something that we factor into this. Now, I always say that the best password management system is one where you never give a password out, which might seem a little bit of an odd thing to say, but that is where session management comes into play. Session management isn't something that we provide as an optional extra or a nice to have. It's supplied built into the product. It's included as part of its core functionality, because this way you get to rotate the passwords at the back end and log the users into the operating system or application they're trying to access at exactly the same time without ever actually revealing what those credentials are. Now, as well as also being able to log them in, we can record all that activity if required, even with keystrokes. Every click of your mouse is recorded. We can do real-time alerting. We can do real-time session monitoring. You can even search sessions that are actively in process for keywords or commands you might have executed. You can pull them up, you can lock them if they're looking suspicious, stop the user from interacting, or even just actually terminate the sessions completely. As well as also doing, some basic command control. So if you've got routers, firewalls, stop people from messing around with your router tables. This is the ability to be able to go in and, say, here's a set of actions a user might take, set of keywords, things in they might do, and then here's some actions that you want the system to be able to take. Either you can allow them to do it, you can alert them it, or you're just going to outright block what they're trying to do. So the way the credentialer, the proxy works is, basically the user is going to log on to password-safe, and this is what I'm going to actually describe it is the traditional method, of a user interacting with the proxy. Now, what I'm going to show you in the demo is something that's even better than this. So, if you think this is great, then, hold on to your socks, because it's going to get a whole lot better. So the user's going to log on to password-safe. They're going to say, I need access to a set of resources, which could be an enclave, a security zone. The proxy is actually going to generate a one-time key. That's sent down to the user's desktop. Now, there's no client code. Bear in mind, there's nothing on the client, nothing on the host required. This is purely a network-based solution. Now, what happens is, let's say, for example, it's IDP. It'll launch MSTSC or your favorite IDP client. We also support Mac as well. That logs onto the proxy using this one-time key. That's all that's required. Now, it's only valid for a certain amount of time. Out of the box, it's actually 60 seconds. It's only, as I say, it can be used one time. So once it's been used to connect, that key is then invalid. The proxy recognizes a key and says, okay, I'm actually going to make that inbound connection to wherever you've requested it, sets up that connection. So as far as the user is concerned, it's absolutely transparent. And when you'll actually see, as user system in a sec, a user would be hard pressed to actually know that they're going through, through a proxy. So what happens is, because we're sitting in the middle, we're able to record all of that activity and also, provide some basic level of control, as I said, when it comes to SSH. Now, when we look at the way of where, say, if we take an RDP session, it's not just keystrokes. In an SSH, it's fairly easy. You've got standard in, standard out. You can search on the activity. But in an RDP session, a user's going to be clicking on pictures. And so what we do is we provide the capability to audit every single click. That means that it's all, you can search on it. You can look at it in context. You can see what a user's doing. So, for example, if they launch an application, you can do a search for the application name. 0 straight into all the sessions where that application's run. 0 straight into that point in the session where a user executed it. And then you can actually move backwards and forwards in the recording to see exactly what the user is doing in the context. So, as I said, and this is the key thing about security, it's all around context, because just because a user has been given authorization to access a set of resources and we've let them in doesn't necessarily mean to say they're doing the right thing, or conversely, doesn't necessarily mean to say they're doing the wrong thing. So when we start looking at different levels of authorization, once a user is actually logged onto the system, very often when we start looking at the context, you might want to see exactly, how is a user using the system? So, for example, if I log in during the middle of the night and I'm coming over a VPN concentrator, maybe it's a firewall access. So, I might automatically give the user access to only my firewall IDs when they come in at that particular time. Let's say they log in during the day and they log in from a corporate office. I might give them access to a different set of credentials by virtue of the fact that they're already in a secure environment. So, adaptive workflow control is about taking all of the different just-in-time elements of how a user's logged in and, what they're trying to access to determine, A, are we going to give you access to this, to what you require? But B, are we going to apply some additional levels of workflow? So, for example, if you need to access the password to a system and you normally get access to a session, well, maybe we can let you have it, but we're going to ask you for approval first. We're going to go through a different workflow mechanism. So, adaptive workflow control takes all of the elements of the time of day, the date. There's a calendar system as well, so you can book things in advance, where the user is, the IP address, where they're coming from, who the user is, and what they're trying to access. Well, the other thing we can do is, as well as controlling access to operating systems, is we can also provide access to applications. And so essentially what this means is, logging a user in. So if we take this example of vSphere, a lot of companies using the SX, we can manage the vSphere credentials at the back end. We can log a user onto the web app, onto the FAT app, whatever it happens to be, and not only log the user in so they don't see the credentials, but we can record everything, all of the mouse movements, everything that's involved with that application we can record. We can record any Windows application. We can do exactly the same thing for Unix and Linux. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a point-and-click interface. We can launch applications. Now, if you think of like an SSH type of environment, maybe that's a menu. Maybe it's a script, like a backup script. You want somebody to be able to run. Maybe the backup script needs to be able to run as root, but you don't want to give them shell access. You don't want them to accidentally do something. So, this allows you to be able to provide controlled access in an audited fashion to applications on both Unix, Linux, and Windows. Now, incidentally, we can also do the same for any web page as well. So, it's not just, it's like a Windows application. We can launch a web browser and we can log you straight onto a website using managed credentials. Now, when it comes to the accountability part of AAA, this all comes roundly down to the reporting. And so, this is where, you need to be able to tie in a user session. So Bob's logged into the system. They've accessed the administrator account on this particular system. You need to tie that back, to Bob. You need to be able to then start looking at, okay, where are the security risks? So, every system in this space has basic auditing in terms of being able to say what Bob did. But, what about all of the accounts on that system? Are there any other accounts on the system that Bob's connected to that maybe aren't managed? Maybe they're, it's a system that was previously used for testing software, and somebody's created, some accounts, some functional accounts to be able to install the software, but then never remove them. So what we can do is, through our scanning capability, we can look for all of these anomalies. We can look for potential areas where the thing might fall down. So again, it's all around, being able to not just provide reporting and, from an auditing standpoint, but also from an operational security standpoint. Threat analytics allows you to be able to take a look at behavior and identify, which things are anomalous. Again, this is critical, when you may not actually be sort of looking for things in advance, and what you're trying to do is look for patterns of behavior. So ultimately, the type of things that really sets our solution apart from the competition is the fact that the adaptive workflow control, the just-in-time permissions capability, the scanning, the fact that we have built-in analytics. We have these things called smart rules that allows you to be able to dynamically build permission sets. Everything that's included, everything that I'm actually sort of going to be showing you in the products and I've discussed so far is included at no additional cost. They're not separate modules that you need to license. It's included with the system. And the last thing, which is actually going to be testament to when I actually do the demonstration in a minute, is it's got a very clean, easy to use interface. If you've got an interface that's difficult to use, your user going to push back against it, and ultimately your project isn't going to be a success. Now, oops, wrong mouse button there. So it's not just our word. The analysts also think this, the same thing as well. So one of the things that's really critical here is if you look at the latest Forrester Wave came out towards the end of last year, they put us right at the very top of the stack when it comes to our PAM capabilities. So at this point, let me actually sort of show you what I mean. So it's been great to talk about it, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as it were. So, as I say, very often, you've got systems where, a user can log in, so for example, if I can type correctly, I'm going to log in as an end user and, say I need access to, sort of passwords or sessions. Now, this is a great, type of use case where, obviously I have a system, I can go in, I can search for what I need. But then users are going to say sometimes, well, okay, now you're changing the way that I work. I'm used to using different tools. I'm used to using, Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection Manager or Devolutions or, mRemote NG. So we can tie directly into these platforms. So for example, here's mRemote NG. You see I can take a shortcut. I haven't had to go into any web interface at all, and this is logging me straight onto the box. This is going through the proxy. So as you can see, it's completely transparent. Just to show there's nothing up my sleeve, Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection Manager. Let's just try a different account. Oops, it would help if I can double click. Again, same sort of thing. It's actually just connecting me directly through, and as I say, as far as I'm concerned to a user, this isn't changing the way I work. I can still organize things in exactly the same way I want. SSH, whether it's PuTTY or in this case like MOBA Xterm, if we double click here, then this is now logging me onto an SSH session. So, from a user perspective, this isn't changing the way that I work, but the difference is everything is going through the proxy. I haven't been exposed to the password, and at no time does a username, the password, or even the host name ever actually come down to the host. This is actually directly connecting me through. Now, the really cool thing that we can also marry on to this is the ability to be able to monitor. So let's say, for example, sorry, I just cannot talk and type. So I'm going to log in as an administrator onto the system. All right. So, maybe I've received notification to say that there's, sort of people that are logged on. Now, I can actually view what the users are doing. So I can actually see a system. So let's say, for example, here, here's one of the ones that was coming through. This was actually for, which account was this? This was admin 01. Okay, so if we actually look at our mRemote NG, and we actually sort of come over to our session over here, Oops, actually I picked the wrong one there. Basically what it allows me to be able to do is not only actually see what the user's doing, but I've also got the ability to be able to lock the session if required. So say, for example, we go here. Actually, I did pick the right one. There we go. Let's come out. There we go. This is the one that I'm using. Let's say something nefarious is happening. I can actually just lock that session. Now, if we come back here, you see that now I no longer have access to be able to go in and do anything with this interface. Now, not only can I actually lock what's going on, I've got the ability to be able to view anything that user's doing. I can even search real-time activity. If you look at the SSH session that's running, so this is running the one that I've got running in MOBA Extern. I can see real-time everything that the user is typing. So if I type in ID, for example, let me come back here. You see basically that's reflected on the screen here, and then in a sec, there we go, it's actually popped up. So we can actually search real-time activity as a user's typing it. And again, if they're doing something nefarious, I can lock, and that means the session's being locked. I no longer have access to be able to go in. If everything's okay, I can unlock, and then the user can carry about their business as normal. There we go, click on the right window. The bottom line is passive management is passive management. What we're doing here is we're acting, we're adding the ability to be able to use passive management and log you on operationally so that your users can be able to do their jobs without any sort of hindrance. So this is pretty well everything I want to show you. I want to make sure that we got enough time just to, to make sure we got any questions addressed. So let me just actually pull up the poll and pass it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, guys, let's jump into our last poll here. Would you be interested in engaging with one of our security experts further? We would love to chat with you or walk you through a more thorough one-on-one demo of our PAM or our vulnerability management solution. So let us know. Select yes. And if you do select yes, somebody will be in contact with you to schedule that demo. So I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive into some questions for a few minutes. Eric, this came in while you were talking. How does one mitigate these type of risks when even if you think you know where the data is, say a cloud provider, where in theory the cloud can be anywhere?
Excellent question. And this is one where you might want to send me an email directly, because this is a 30-minute answer that I'll try to put in 45 seconds. The trick is data-centric approach. Don't go in and look at how do we secure the cloud, how do we secure Windows, how do we secure this. Determine what that critical data is, figure out what the risk, and then identify what the appropriate compensating controls are. So for a given piece of data, it always has to be encrypted. This is just an example. It always must have 15-character passwords. It always must be logged. And then, regardless of where that data goes, those control mechanisms with that data go with it. So if you're going to sign a contract with a cloud provider and they're going to have access to that data, then there better be SLAs around those security requirements that you identify. So focus on the data, determine what controls need to be in place, and then always map and track those controls against the data.
Martin, how do we address two-factor authentication requirements for the resources under management behind the proxy? For example, if they can't be set up for username and password authentication.
Sure. So, I mean, when it comes to two-factor behind the proxy, normally the way that this type of solution is implemented is you would actually put the two-factor at the front end. So, obviously we support Radius, Smart Card, X509, sort of SAML. So, what we do is we actually authenticate the user at the front end. And if you take a look at, when I did the Direct Connect just now, we also support Radius Push. So, for example, if you're using like Duo, when I'd gone in and I was launching that session in Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection Manager, it would have sent like a two-factor authentication to my phone. So basically what we're able to do is front end that. It's not usual that you would actually do pass-through two-factor. You would normally put that at the front end, against the low privileged credentials.
Okay, guys, we have hit the top of the hour, so I'm going to wrap this up. A reminder that you will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now, and it will come from communications@beyondtrust.com, so be on the lookout for that follow-up. A huge thanks to Eric and to Martin today for speaking, and everybody who attended live. You guys rock. Thank you for all your questions, and have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you at the next webinar. Take care, everybody, and goodbye.